Ladies and gentlemen, I am getting closer and closer to that 200k C for Raid 3, and throughout my adventure I have gone through all of the invocations and I want to share that knowledge with you. Have you gone through Akkha's scum phase and wonder why life is cruel? Me too. Me too. Did you turn on Mind the Gap and got leech title? I can't identify with that, but I feel your struggle. All of that sparked an idea in me. What if we just go through all of the invocations, how they work, and see what tips and tricks we can catch while watching the video. And for bonus, I'll give extra tips in each room to make our life easier for raids, to make sure you get those purples and complete all rooms. Let's start from the top. Throughout this video, I will give every single invocation a rating from 1 to 10. 1 being the easiest and must have, and 10 being the hardest, so you can make an educated conclusion what invocation you should add or not add. I have tried every single invocation and this is my story. No, I'm joking. Okay, let's go. Before we get to any specific invocations though, we should talk about how invocations affect your overall experience of raiding. Invocations allow you to customize your raid however you want them to be. The more you choose, the harder the raid gets. Not only does it affect your specific rooms, it also affects the overall health and damage of each boss once you activate it. Like for instance, if I add this timer to my invocation list, immediately it makes every single enemy in the raid deal 4% more damage, 4% more hit points, 4% more accuracy and defense. It had no impact on the rooms itself, but the overall hardness of the raid is increased. And that goes with every single invocation you add, depending on how hard it is. Every 10 points in your raid makes the raid 4% harder. So for instance, level 150 raid is 60% harder. A level 300 raid is 120% harder than level 0 raid, which is the threshold for normal and expert modes. There are a total of 44 invocations and the maximum you can get is level 600. Which is almost impossible to complete, but have been done by few people. Okay, let's talk about specific invocations now. The first and easiest invocations are the time and attempt invocations. For the time, you have a set amount of minutes to complete the raid. Failing to do so will lower your raid level by 20. Let's say you have a 150 level raid and walk for it invocation is activated, which means you have to finish the entire raid in 40 minutes. If you don't make the timer, your raid will now decrease to 130, aka you will always lose 20 raid level. Now keep in mind the timer begins as soon as you enter the first room and ends when the final boss is finished. So wasting time between rooms is highly not recommended as every second counts. If you're an experienced player, timers are a great way to add extra difficulty to your raid without making the rooms harder. If you're just starting off, I would highly recommend you don't add timers in until you get comfortable with the raid. But walk for it invocation though, once you get used to the normal raids, you will almost always get it under 40 minutes, which is why I'll give it a difficulty of 2 out of 10, but again, don't turn it on until you actually manage to beat the timers. Another basic invocation will be the attempt run invocations, where you have certain number of attempts in raid. Every time your entire team gets wiped, that counts as a single attempt. As you can see, doing solos affects this much more than teams, because in solos it's only you, but in teams you can get carried. So let's say 3 of you enter the monkey room, 2 of you will die in the middle of the fight and last one manages to finish the room. That is still counted as one single attempt. The best thing to do in solos is always have at least softcore run activated, which gives you a total of 3 attempts. The reason this works so well is because you can still die during the raids twice when you do solos and just don't lose your items. After the second death you can just leave and it gives you that leeway to still be able to complete raids if you do 1 or 2 mistakes. Most of the time, once you die twice, you won't be able to complete raids anyways, due to not having enough resources to fight for the 3rd time, which gives you a great opportunity to just leave and start over. In teams, if you're confident enough that someone can always carry, turning on hardcore run is definitely worth it, as it offers 25 raid points for essentially not making the 4 rooms harder. If you're worried about dying in teams, my best advice is to always rather stay at high HP than rather risk it for the DPS, because 99% of the time the DPS will always be there in teams, but dying will lower your chance of getting rare drops. So try to stay alive, don't be afraid to ask your teammates for supplies if you need them. Luckily, Raid 3 is very heavily based on skill factor, where the more you understand the challenges, the less damage you take overall. And just like with everything else in old school RuneScape, once you get the hang of it, it's recommended to start playing with the timers and attempt invocations to get those higher level raids. For softcore run, I will give difficulty of 2 out of 10 as well, as all you have to do is leave the raids before the third attempt begins and start over. If you have any questions, I will 100% answer them in the comments below, so let me know. Next up we have the Helpful Spirit. Now if you are starting off, this bold blue looking mother effer is one of the most OP things you could ask for. Players oftentimes develop their entire raids around this guy, and there is a good reason for it. What the Helpful Spirit does is offer a lot of supplies that are disgustingly overpowered. I'm not gonna go into detail about the specific items he offers, but I'll put a link down below. What I will show you is how all 3 invocations affect the supplies you get. So let's start with the first one, where you get 100% of the supplies from the Helpful Spirit. But this doesn't count as an invocation, it's just already in the base of the raid, and this is the supplies you get. Now the meta right now is to go with the power option if you feel like you have enough supplies, as the liquid adrenaline works extremely well with items like Dragon Dagger, Panda's Godsword, Dragon Claws, the Fang, and so on and so on. Also the extra 2 swords you get is more than enough to help you get through the entire raid. The life option is oftentimes chosen as you see the Helpful Spirit second time in the raids. How this works is after completing your first 2 rooms, the Helpful Spirit will appear and give you supplies, and after completing the next 2 rooms, he will appear again and give you supplies second time. So the meta currently is to go for power on first option and life on the second option, and sprinkle in a little bit of chaos if you feel like you need to balance between the 2. Again, go through your options. If you feel like you wasted too many supplies in the first 2 rooms and see a chaos option with 1 salt and Prius superstores, take that instead of the power option. If after completing all 4 challenges and your only obstacle left is the boss, and you feel like you have enough supplies to take the boss down, go with the power instead of the life option. It's important to think 10 minutes ahead to take full advantage of the spirit. So this is what 100% Helpful Spirit looks like. What I would do is prioritize smelling salts over everything else, as it speeds up your clears and that in return saves your supplies as well. Think about it this way: if you go to a challenge room, have salts activated and clear the boss in 4 minutes instead of the 7 minutes you would have if you didn't have salts, that 1 dose of salt also saved you on brews and superstores and other supplies. That's what I'm telling, that you have to think ahead and not just think what my next room is gonna be. This is my personal priority list. Everyone has a different one, but I choose my options based on this. Number 1, smelling salts. Number 2, ambrosia. Number 3, liquid adrenaline. Number 4, nectar and tears. And number 5, crystal scarab and silk dressing. Now, why I don't usually take the lower invocation is because these are the results as you saw on 100% Helpful Spirit. You will get plenty of supplies to finish the raids, but this is what it looks like when you are on 66, 33 and 10% Helpful Spirit invocations. What these invocations basically do is offer the same supplies, but it has a less chance of seeing those supplies. And extra supplies during the raid could be the difference between you completing it and not completing it. So unless you're heavily gonna start relying on raids that are 350 level difficulty and higher, I would not touch any of these invocations, as you're just making your life harder for yourself. For all the Helpful Spirit invocations, I will give this 7 out of 10 difficulty. Alright, next up we have one of my favorite invocations, path difficulty. Jagex defines path as the 4 rooms you have to complete in Raid 3 before the final challenge. How paths work is that they always start at level 0, and once you activate the invocations they steadily go up few levels. The maximum level a single room can get is level 6. Trust me, you don't want to do level 6 rooms, they get increasingly more difficult every time the rooms level up. So first up we have Path Seeker, Pathfinder and Pathmaster, which increase room difficulty by 1, 2 or 3 levels, and only one of these invocations can be activated at once. For these I will give 4, 6 and 7 out of 10 difficulty. And the final path invocation is Walk the Path. Now what I have gathered from a lot of the players I have raided with is that this is either the most OP, best, amazing invocation they have ever seen, or they freaking hate it. There's no in between. So let's talk about Walk the Path and see how you can activate it during your raids and get those plus 50 raid points. First of all, how it works. Well, completing a single path or room in raids will cause 2 other rooms to level up, and it's randomized. The first time Walk the Path is activated, it will boost the damage and HP of 2 other rooms by 8%, and that increases as you go higher and higher levels. I will put up a screenshot for all the changes. I don't want to go deep into that as we do have a lot of invocations still covered, but if you have Walk the Path invocation activated, this is the optimal route I would always take. Baba first, Zebak second, Akkha third, and Kephri last. The reason for this is because Zebak and Baba have the most difficult changes to their paths, and you want to complete those first to get the supplies from Helpful Spirit and not get overwhelmed by their increased boss mechanics. Trust me, level 4 Zebak is not something you want to try out. Some players have said it's more difficult than doing 6 Jihad challenges. So Baba into Zebak, then get the Helpful Spirit to give you salts, then you finish Akkha's room that now is most likely level 2, which adds an extra mechanic, aka one more blast, which is very easy to dodge. And then you finish off with Kephri. In theory, you should take 0 damage in that room. All you have to do is attack once, move away, attack once, and repeat the process. One last tip for path invocations, you can kinda figure out what levels each room is gonna be even before you enter the raids, if you know the path you're taking and the invocations you have activated. Also, if you're not comfortable with the extra mechanics, Walk the Path adds in every single room. What you can for example do is just activate Pathfinder, which makes all the rooms level 2, gives you 40 invocation points, but doesn't add the mechanics in. So you still have slightly harder rooms for 40 point boost. One more thing, it's not 100% confirmed, but through RuneLite and RuneScape wiki resources, they have kinda detected that getting purples it's much more likely the more DPS you do in the entire raids, the more damage you do. What that means is the more health bosses have, the more damage you do in those rooms, the more likely you are to get rare drops at the end of the raid. So what players have started doing now is they activate the path invocations more often than before, as it adds more health to bosses, which increases your chance of getting a purple drop. So keep that in mind if good loot is what your end goal is. For Walk the Path invocation, I will give it 6 out of 10 difficulty. Next up, we have 2 invocations that evolve around prayers. Firstly, we have Quiet Prayers, which will make protection prayers 10% less effective within the raid. Now 10% might not seem a lot, but think about it this way. The average raid will take you around 35 minutes to complete, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but during those 35 minutes, if you constantly take 10% more damage than you should, that could add up to like 3 extra serotonin brews, or like 100 to 150 more damage that you didn't need to take, and those 3 extra brews could be the difference between you completing the raid and not. So think through your entire run before you activate this. Protection prayers oftentimes outweigh every single gear option in old school RuneScape by design. They're just very good. 100% protection from all damage while only needing 43 prayer is just insanely good. So removing that option could be devastating in your run. For this invocation, I will give 7 out of 10 difficulty. And the next we have is Deadly Prayers, where your prayer is drained by 20% of the damage you take. So let's say you get hit by 20 on Zebak's room. That will also now remove 4 prayer points. I tested this invocation on multiple levels of raids, and the outcome was that when I was using high defensive gear like Pandos, I usually on average needed about extra super restore potion per run to finish it, and it gave me 20 invocation points. Now if you think 20 raids level for 1 super restore is good trade for you, I would activate this. I did feel like it kinda works similar to Smite Prayer in PvP, where you have to pay more attention to your prayer points now than you did before. I also tried this with Full Void, and since it has no defensive stats, I used almost 2 super restores more per run. Keep in mind this also works in puzzle rooms, so for instance the small scarabs in Kephri's puzzle, the orbs in Akkha's puzzle room, and of course one of the biggest prayer training places is the monkey room in Baba's puzzle, where you could sip an entire super restore in those 3 minutes you stay there. Overall, I would stay away from Quiet Prayers if you're a beginner, and only activate Deadly Prayers when you are confident that the extra super restore is more than enough to last you through. For Deadly Prayers, I would give 5 out of 10 difficulty. Next up we have Dehydration. Now I'm not even gonna go over this very long, as I don't think anyone should activate this unless they seriously consider going over 400 raids difficulty, in which case this guy probably isn't meant for you. If you activate this invocation, you can't use Sara brews, you can't use brews that Helpful Spirit gives you, and you can't use Ambrosia, one of the most OP items in the raids. Those are the 3 core potions you need to complete raids, so don't activate this unless you know what you're doing. There is a cheese mechanic you can do with yellow Keris Partisan inside the raids, where its special attack works kinda like a single dose of ambrosia, but that is for experienced players, and let's be honest, you are not that. Sorry, that was mean, but it had to be said. For Dehydration, I would give 8 out of 10 difficulty. The opposite of that utility invocation we have is on a diet, which allows you to no longer bring food to raid. Potions that heal you are not affected by this. I have this activated as I never intend to use any food with raids anyways. I bring my own brews, I get brews and ambrosia from the helpful spirit, and that is good enough for me. If you're an Iron Man, however, who doesn't have access to Sarah brews, I would highly recommend you don't turn this on, just for the simple fact that you also get items like silk dressing that have very overpowered effects. Only 1 dose of silk dressing heals you for 100 HP in 60 seconds, which is basically 5 sharks in 1 inventory slot, and you lose that option once you turn on a diet invocation on. For this, I will give 5 out of 10 difficulty. And last but not least, on the utility invocations we have overlay training, which makes so that whatever special attack you use, it will always use 100% of special attack energy. I have tried to test this invocation on some occasions with different setups, like for instance, oftentimes for me, 1 band of Scots or special attack was enough, I didn't need 2. Also, drinking a liquid adrenaline will restore your special attack to normal, even if this is activated. But now that I've gone higher levels of raid, I oftentimes look away from this invocation because I feel special attack energy is one of the most valuable entities I have during the raid. Oftentimes I get at least 100 HP back by using blowpipe specs. I also wear the light bearer ring, and I can use 100% of my special attack at the start of the boss and then use 100% special attack to finish the boss off as well, because the ring restores my special attack energy so fast. Another example I have is that I use the Osmuten's Fang as my main DPS weapon. With liquid adrenaline and the final phase of the final fight, I can do up to 12 special attacks during that phase, which deals around 500 damage almost always. The accuracy on this weapon is insane, and the special attack just amplifies that. I wouldn't have this opportunity had I turned overlay training invocation on. And lastly, for this invocation, the most important part is when you DDS the core on phase 2 of Warden, as if you have this invocation activated, you won't be able to kill the core fast enough, which also makes you waste more supplies. And that's why I'm telling you need to think ahead, because even though this affects your special attack energy only, if you look at the bigger picture, this could also affect your supplies if you can't kill the bosses fast enough. For this invocation, I would give 6 out of 10 difficulty. There we go, we are halfway through the invocations, we are done with the utility ones, and now it's time to move on to each room specific invocations. Let me take a sip of my coffee, this is gonna be a long video. How is your day, by the way? I hope you're doing well, and I wish you the best, okay? Let's continue. The first room invocation part we will be looking at is Akkha, as I feel the players are struggling with Akkha's room the most when it comes to different invocation. So let's go over all of them and see where we land, and I'll give you a few tips along the way. Before we start with Akkha, if you're trying to learn raids or maybe climb from 150 to 200 difficulty, I highly recommend you don't use any Akkha's invocations, as in my opinion they are the hardest ones out of all the boss invocations we have. They require much more thought process and agility to get through, and I don't mean the skill. First invocation, Double Trouble. Akkha will perform 2 special attacks at once instead of 1. Now, what are his special attacks? There are 3 of them. The first is Trailing Orbs, where Akkha will mark all players and then turn them black. Whenever a player moves, they will create an orb behind them. Avoid these orbs at all costs, because stepping on them could be lethal. They deal a lot of damage, sometimes up to 40 damage over time. The second special attack is Memory Blast. Akkha will disappear from the arena, and the symbols of 4 sections of the arena will start to light up in specific order. You must remember the order and stand in those sections to avoid damage. And the third special attack is only when you do raids in teams. This does not affect solo players. It's called Detonate, and Akkha will mark all players, and now they turn white. After a while, you will detonate a blast in row or column depending on your invocations. This attack can be entirely neglected if players stand on the same exact tile when they turn white. Now back to the first invocation. Akkha will perform 2 special attacks at once instead of 1 special attack. If you're doing solo raids, you will only see 2 special attacks anyways, as the third one is meant for teams. This is particularly difficult invocation as you have to maneuver in a way where you don't stumble on your own orbs. It's also difficult on solos because while looking out for the orbs, you have to memorize the symbols as well. So while this is going on, you have to pay attention to 3 or 4 different things at once, which could be overwhelming. I highly recommend you don't use this invocation when you are starting off. Even now, after I tried it out a lot, I still can't sometimes get it right, and it could be frustrating, especially for newer players. Rating for this invocation is 7 out of 10 in hardness. Second invocation for Akkha. His ranged and magic attacks will also deal melee damage to anyone next to him. A great way to understand this is just tag Akkha and stay away from his melee range when he does the range or mage attack. Why this invocation is difficult is because Akkha will on purpose follow you to melee distance even when he does range or mage attacks. So you always have to keep moving. And if you miss once, you immediately take up to 40 damage from his melee basic attacks. Since Akkha is one of the longest rooms, I once again do not recommend this invocation, as let's say the fight is 5 minutes long. If during that time you can't get out of melee range in few occasions, you have already wasted 2 or 3 brews, which could be fateful in the long run. For this invocation, I will also give 7 out of 10 difficulty. One of the reasons I always tell newer players to never use Akkha invocations is because out of all 4 rooms in Raid 3, Akkha has the most basic abilities. You always have to look up for what to pray, what attack style you use, what shadow to attack in what square. There are 3 special attacks added in on the base of the raids. If you add extra invocations on top of all of those things, it just simply gets overwhelming. Third one is stay vigilant. This is pretty simple. Akkha will randomly swap attack styles and prayers instead of doing it in set intervals. Usually Akkha changes styles about every 60 seconds, but with this activated, Akkha can change attack styles every 5 seconds, or I have even seen cases where I genuinely use melee attacks for 2 minutes without him ever changing attack styles. It's randomized, so it could be good or it could be bad. This is one of those cases where you can use this if you are already comfortable with everything else in the room. Keep in mind, Akkha will randomly change attack styles during the final boss, aka the Warden in phase 3 as well, if you see him as the Phantom. So if you do have this invocation activated, I highly recommend you choose the path where you get Baba and Zebak Phantoms during phase 3 of Warden instead of Akkha, as once again, this could be overwhelming. For this invocation, I will give 6 out of 10 difficulty. And the final Akkha invocation is Feeling Special. Akkha adds extra mechanics to all 3 of his special attacks. The Detonate, which turns you white in team raids for triggering in more directions. This special attack doesn't happen in solo raids. The memory attack will be now much faster. You only have 1.2 seconds to react every time. A quick tip for this will be to immediately click the next square when you see the animation of that square, as you will never take damage from it, so even with lag, you should be able to click on the next tile. Always stay on the closest tile on the middle of each square, so you have to move a single tile after every special attack. A Feeling Special final added mechanic is the orbs that spawn when you turn black. Well, there is more of them. Additional orb will spawn in front of you, not only behind you. For this, I will give 7 out of 10 difficulty as well. And that's it, those are the Akkha invocations. I will say this again, I highly recommend you stay away from these until you figure out Akkha's role perfectly, and then start to add them in one by one to get a feel for Akkha, because otherwise it could be overwhelming, especially for beginner raiders. Okay, we have Zebak next. Luckily, Zebak is very straightforward with his invocations. First is one and only special attack is that when you have this invocation activated, called Not Just a Head, occasionally Zebak will perform the ancient spell Blood Blitz, and this attack can be entirely avoided if prayed against magic. However, if not, Zebak will usually deal around 10 to 15 damage and heal off that. With this invocation, it will also summon a black cloud which loses health rapidly unless they're standing on the same tile as the player. All the player has to do is move away from the cloud until it runs out of health. His other two invocations are Arterial Spray, which makes the blood blitz heal more and has increased range, but again can be entirely avoided if Protect from Magic is on. And the second invocation is Blood Thinners, which summons 3 blood clouds instead of 1, but it works very similar to 1, where you just move a few tiles away and let them run out of health. For all 3 of these invocations, I will give 3 out of 10 difficulty. And the final Zebak invocation, and the one that I've seen most players struggle with, is Upset Stomach, that will make the acid pools Zebak throws on the ground have larger radius, and the water jugs only wash away 3x3 area instead of the normal 5x5 area. Jagex changed the mechanics so that there is always one water jug that can be straight thrown into the rocks, so we don't get cases where it's actually impossible to hide behind the rock, which we used to have on the first week. That being said, it will get much more difficult to maneuver with this invocation, and I highly recommend you turn this on once you're comfortable with always managing to hit the rocks with water jugs. For this invocation, I will give 5 out of 10 difficulty. And that's it for Zebak. If I had any recommendations for this room, I would highly propose to turn on everything that's involved with Blood Blitz, as it offers you 30 invocations with almost no downside. The damage can be entirely avoided with just Protect from Magic, and even if you do take damage, it's not very high and usually around 10 to 15 damage. There is a caveat, which is if you stack on top of each other in teams, the Blood Blitz will multiply and deal damage for every single player that is stacked on top of each other or next to you. So if you do have this activated in team setups, you must stay apart from each other and keep space, because I have seen players take up to 60 damage with one special attack from Zebak, and that's not nice. Up next we have Kephri. First invocation is Lively Larva. The number of eggs Kephri throws out is doubled. Now the reason I would highly recommend activating this is because you are literally taking 0 damage no matter how many eggs there are. Could be 2, could be 10, as long as you have Protect from range activated. It's free 10 points, turn it on. 1 out of 10 difficulty. The second Kephri invocation is more overloads. Since Kephri has total of 3 phases, what this does is it adds extra range and melee peak scarab to the mix of already existing ones. What this does, it adds an extra range and melee peak scarab to the mix of already existing ones. So after the first phase, what you usually get is 1 big range scarab. But for this invocation, you also get an extra melee one. And after the second phase of Kephri, you get all 3 scarabs, so Ranger, Melee, and Magic one. If I had to rate this invocation from difficulty 1 to 10, I would give this a 6 out of 10. Blowing mud the tongue Kephri throws at you is now doubled. This has 0 effect on solo raids, meaning it's a must-have. It's literally free in solo raids. It's free 10 points for no downsides. In teams, however, you have to coordinate the tongue in a way where you don't get your teammates stuck on one corner. How to effectively avoid this is either stand on the same tile with your teammates, so when the tongue is thrown at you, Kephri will target the same exact squares, which makes the special attack meaningless. Activate this, it's a must, rating 1 out of 10 in solos and 3 out of 10 in teams. The fourth and most annoying Kephri's invocation is Medic. What this does is after every phase of Kephri ends, healing scarabs will spawn that heal Kephri back to full HP. If you, however, activate this invocation, it will always 100% of the time spawn the scarabs no matter what. I don't recommend this, as you can barely DPS the boss, because you have constantly run around the room to tackle the scarabs, because if one of them gets to Kephri, it could heal her for 40 health, which is not good. If you have a coordinated team, then yes, this is something you can look at, but just like with Akkha's room, you have to pay attention to a lot of details, and adding in unnecessary invocation could ruin the entire raid for you. Difficulty for this one, 7 out of 10 in teams, 8 out of 10 in solos. And the final Kephri's invocation is Aerial Assault. Kephri doesn't have an auto attack. Instead, every few seconds she throws a bomb at you. Now what Aerial Assault invocation does is turn the bomb to 3x3 instead of 1x1. Once again, the more players you have in your team, the more area Kephri will cover with the auto attacks. You have to think about it this way as well. If you follow the guide I set you up before where you do Kephri's room last, it's very likely Kephri has higher level now, and that means if Kephri is either level 2 or level 4, she will throw those auto attacks much faster now. The best way to dodge this is again just auto attack, move, and keep the rhythm going. In teams this is difficulty 7 out of 10, in solos I would rate this 4 out of 10. Okay, last and final room, we have Baba. Personally, every run I do, I have all Baba's invocations activated as I usually complete this room first, which makes it a lot easier, and if I fail, I can just start over without wasting much time. So let's go over this and see what we get. Mind the Gap, oh, this is a good one. Baba has two phases, first one kicks in at 66% of his health and second one at 33%. And when the phase does kick in, he throws the player to the bottom of the pit, and what Mind the Gap does is, unless you're standing on the corner of the room and get kicked into the pile of rubble, you will take lethal damage if you stand in the middle, as you will straight fall into the pit. If this isn't activated, the pit has zero effects. Now I know I might get flagged for this, but personally I have to put this invocation as 1 out of 10 difficulty, as I think 99% of times I never had problems with this, and it was just free 10 points added to my raid. However, I do know beginner players oftentimes forget this, as I did at the start, so what we do in teams usually is remind everyone else, hey, Zebak's upset stomach is on, hey, Kephri's aerial assault is on, hey, Baba's Mind the Gap is on, so make sure you stay at the side of the room when it goes to phase, and so on and so on. If you keep that in mind, this has no effect on the outcome of the fight, nor does it make it harder. Next up, gotta have faith. Before we get into this, I need to explain a special attack by Baba, and one of them is he spawns few baboons during the fight that either attack you or the sarcophagus in the side of the room. Once that sarcophagus is down, it starts spewing out lava balls in the room. Now what this invocation does, the lava balls deal more damage the less prayer points you have. You can entirely avoid the lava altogether if you manage to kill the baboons before they get to the sarcophagus, and even when they do manage to open it up, you can just stand on the opposite side of the arena and take 0 damage. It's an easy invocation, just turn it on. 2 out of 10 difficulty. Jungle Japes, the same baboons we just talked about that Baba occasionally spawns, also leave behind a trail of bananas after they die. If you step on the bananas, you take up to 15 damage and you are stunned for 3 seconds. Luckily there aren't many baboons that spawn during the fight, but it's usually 5 points, so take this with a caution. It usually doesn't have a very big effect on the outcome of the fight, but I have seen cases where baboons leave banana peels on the ground while the boulder dash is activated and players step on them, get stunned for 3 seconds, and then the boulders just roll over them. Difficulty for this, 3 out of 10. Shaking things up, occasionally Baba does a special attack where he just sits still and the ground under you will start shaking. That is size of 5 times 5. All you have to do is move away 5 tiles and it takes 0 damage. If you have shaking things up, all Baba does is damage a 6x6 instead of the 5x5. So you move away 1 extra tile and you will be fine. Difficulty 3 out of 10. And last but not least, Boulder Dash. Every time Baba goes into phase, like we talked about before, he knocks the player to the bottom of the arena and starts throwing rocks from the top of the arena. What Boulder Dash invocation does, it makes boulders spawn slightly faster. I will show you side by side comparison how fast the boulders are with this turned on and turned off. As you can see, Boulder Dash invocation is about 2 seconds faster. I wouldn't recommend this invocation to a beginner player, but if you're experienced enough, this should be a piece of cake. Difficulty 5 out of 10. I did struggle with this as well, even though I've done hundreds of raids now, so take this with caution. And that's it with Baba. Few tips before we get to the final fight. It is highly recommended you practice trying to go through boulders before the special phase ends, as it could save you up to 2 minutes of time with very little effort. You always max it in the boulders no matter what, so if you know you can one hit the boulders, you can click on it and then run straight through it, as it registers that boulder is already at 1 HP, even though the visual boulder is still there. Find the sweet spot for you with the boulders where you actually deal enough damage to them and one hit them. You can boost your range damage with gear, prayers and potions. Okay, we are on our last final step. Here we go. The final boss. There are a total of 3 phases in the final fight, so let's start with the first and second and then we'll talk about the last stretch. There are a total of 3 invocations for the first 2 phases of the fight. First up we have Ancient Haste, which makes the wardens charge the special attacks faster. The obelisk at the middle of the room sends out orbs to the wardens, and once that yellow bar at both sides of the warden reach 100%, they throw out their specific special attack. What this invocation does, it makes the orbs give wardens more health, which in turn deals more special attacks. Always turn this invocation on if you can. Trust me, it's really easy. If you have enough DPS to take down the obelisk, this shouldn't be a worry for you. There aren't many special attacks to begin with. If you're doing solos, you get hit twice and just have to look out for the disco. Difficulty 3 out of 10. Next up, acceleration. During the second phase, the Warden's basic attack will be 1 second faster than normal, and the obelisk in the middle that does special attacks will now throw them out faster as well. Difficulty, yep, you guessed it, turn this on. 3 out of 10 again. Now I will say this, if you're not comfortable yet, I will turn this on one at a time. Get a feel for each of them, see how fast your obelisk charges up. Usually it does 2 special attacks per phase, sometimes you can get away with 1. Next up we have penetration. Once the obelisk has charged up its special attack, it will deal more damage on successful hit and temporarily disable protection prayers. Out of the last 3 invocations, this one could be the hardest, as you could easily get stacked out with 70 damage, because once those protection prayers come off, Warden can deal up to 40 damage with his basic attacks. Like I said before, get a feel for it. Turn on the previous 2 first, and then when you feel comfortable, attach this one there as well. For this invocation, I would give 5 out of 10 difficulty. I will say I activated all 3 of these invocations on first week, and I still haven't taken them off because I gotten so used to it, and that's what I recommend you do as well. Because some invocations you just never want to take off. There isn't really anything specific about all of these invocations, it's just that they're slightly faster than normal, but once you get the feel for it, you don't even notice the speed. Okay, let's go over the last few invocations and then I'll talk about must-have invocations in your setups. So we got to the final part of Raid 3, congratulations my man. In this phase we have 3 invocations. First 2 are simple. Warden's basic attack will be faster by 0.6 seconds and 1.2 seconds respectively. I will turn these on one by one. You wanna slowly get the hang of it, slowly start to go faster, get a feel for it. See how your weapon performs versus how the Warden's attack go with it. For instance, I have a 5 tick weapon. So if I have both of these turned on, I can't always attack Warden every time I change sides. So I had to actually get a feel for my weapon, and now when I go back to 4 tick weapons, I again have to change my muscle memory to attack every single time. 4 tick weapons usually do work best in this 2 situation, as the Warden attacks the same speed as your weapon. For these invocations, I would rate them 5 out of 10 difficulty. And the last invocation we have is Insanity. First up, this invocation makes the final boss faster again by 0.6 seconds. So if you compare Warden's basic attack with no invocations versus Insanity invocations, the basic attack is now almost 2 seconds faster. The second thing Insanity does is now you have less time to kill the skulls between phases. Essentially you kinda need to be perfectly aligned, and missing even 1 skull could be fatal. This also is the case if you don't have Insanity turned on, but then you have so much time to kill the skulls that you usually never run out of time no matter what. If you have Insanity turned off, the Warden will always basic attack in a cycle, whereas if you have Insanity turned on, Warden will start off based on where his last attack was before the skull phase started. Which means you have to remember before the skulls appear on which side of the Warden attacked last and stand on that side before the next phase starts. And once Warden reaches 20% HP, what Insanity does is 2 things here. The Raid Lightning Warden basic attack now comes down 0.6 seconds faster, and the tiles that Warden removes from the end of the room also disappear much faster now, giving you less time to complete the room. Overall experience with this invocation is 9 out of 10. I definitely think this is one of the hardest invocations. In fact, it's straight up impossible to do if you don't have very endgame gear. Like max melee setup with Fang, Twisted Bow, Shadow Staff, maybe even Bofa. Sometimes it's good enough, sometimes it isn't. Or you just have teammates that can carry you, so difficulty starts with the fact that you need to have endgame gear in order to turn this on. Otherwise, you might just set yourself up to failure. I have tested this invocation out in about 10 to 15 runs now, and I only managed to complete with like 70% of the time. One final tip as well, a good way to memorize where the Warden attacked last before the skulls appear is just to look at the HP bar of the Warden, because you know he throws skulls out at 80, 60, 40 and 20% of health, so whenever you get close to that HP amount, you pay attention to where the Warden attacked last. Also, if you have problems and are struggling to not dodge enough in the last phase, I would just recommend you look straight only to the ground in front of you and not the boss itself, as it has very large clip box and you need to keep your eyes mostly on the ground and where to click rather than the boss itself. Stay on the left side so you know what prayers to put up and you're good to go. Now before we end off, a list of invocations that you ought to definitely use when you start raiding, as these are mostly free and not very difficult to add in. Softcore run doesn't make the rooms harder and gives free points. Any of the bot invocations, as I said before, the community has now started to figure out that if you turn on invocations that increase the room health, which makes you deal more DPS throughout the raids, it will increase your chance of getting rare drops. You want to deal more damage, you want to have the number be higher, so you have higher chance for goodies, and bot invocations allow you to do that. Just pick whatever invocation you are most comfortable with, but I would highly recommend you start with Walk the Bat early on and learn it as you go deeper, where you have no choice but to turn it on anyways. Lively Larva doesn't make Kephri's room harder, instead gives you 3 points. Blowing Mud, exactly the same thing. These 3 Zebak Invocations, they don't impact your run that much and offer free 30-point rise in your raid levels. Gotta have faith, usually you don't get to a point where the sarcophagus becomes open and does a lot of damage, because you get the baboons before they get to their target. Shaking things up, instead of normally moving 5 tiles, now you move 6 tiles, which is almost no difference. Ancient Haste and Acceleration. Both just slightly makes the final fight more annoying, but it's very easy to handle once you try them out once or twice. If you activate all of these invocations I just shown you, you will end up at exactly 150 normal raids level, which I feel like the perfect place to start if you're looking to grasp into end game raiding. This offers you a variety of challenges while also keeping it somewhat clean, that you don't get frustrated by certain invocations or bots you take. And the Walk the Bot invocation allows you better chance of getting purpose at the end of all this, and who knows, you might just end up getting the almost 2 billion GP staff at the end of your raid. If you made it this far into the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe, and all I can say is thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love you, and new video coming in few days. Here's a free kiss for you. Mwah. Bye.